Welcome, everybody, to Shmooze Radio. We come to you live every single Tuesday, right here on 1150 AM KKNW. I am your host, Rabbi Elazar Bogomilsky, and we're here to talk about some interesting topics today. You know, very rarely on Shmooze Radio do we talk about the contrast Jewish law versus secular law. And I thought it would be interesting if we spend a little time in educating our audience what makes something Jewish law. You know, you always hear, what's the Jewish law? How do the rabbis determine this law? What is it based on? What's the specific purpose for them creating law different than secular law? Why can't we just have one body of law, one guidebook, one perspective, and why don't we just all live by those same rules? If it works creating society, why can't it work in relationship to a religion as well? So that's what we're going to try to schmooze about today. I'm going to give you some interesting highlights and hopefully a very unique perspective that you'll have a different appreciation and understanding what it means when the rabbis determine certain laws. What is the power that's given to a rabbi? And other things we'll try to schmooze about in relationship to this because it's a big topic. So I want to get into it right now. You know, generally speaking, when we talk about the power of law, we talk about the uniqueness of creating law. There is no such thing, and I underline this and I say it in bold, so to speak. There is no such thing as a rabbi. A couple of myths I want to clear up. First of all, in relationship to kosher food, and this question I constantly get, and that is, do rabbis bless food? And that's what makes food kosher. The answer is absolutely not. There is no such thing as a rabbi that goes over to food and blesses the food, and because of the rabbi's blessing, the food becomes kosher. Kosher has absolutely nothing to do with the blessing of a rabbi and has everything to do with the ingredients, how it's prepared, the vessels. These are all the things that make something kosher for something that would be considered non-kosher. That's the only difference. Rabbis don't bless the food. The expression in Hebrew means hashgacha, which means they sort of put their name and responsibility behind that product, saying that they've watched and they've observed the mechanism of how that production takes place. It could be a can of Coke. It could be a candy bar. It could be a restaurant that you're eating in. All these different things, what it means is when we say it's under rabbinical supervision, the rabbi, and there are many rabbis, and there are many symbols, and one day we'll do a show, as we've done a couple of years ago. It's probably up due for another show, because things have changed in the sense of how many more rabbinical supervisions have been brought to the marketplace, so to speak. But there are way over 100 to 200 different trustworthy rabbinical supervisions that I would be comfortable to rely on them on eating their product. But that's not what we're talking about today. I'm not talking about kosher versus non-kosher. That's another issue, another show, another discussion. What I want to talk about is primarily what's the power behind the rabbi, what decisions do rabbis make, and where do we see different situations from a secular perspective versus Jewish law. And primarily, really, the big loaded question is, what makes something Jewish law? What creates the Jewish law? Under what framework do we say this is Jewish law? So bear with me, and hopefully you'll walk away with a really amazing education today. So this show is not schmoozing today. This is education. So put on your schmoozing hat, put it aside a second, and put on an educational hat, because this is really going to be something that you probably did not read or hear about in the past. And hopefully you'll walk away with, again, appreciation and understanding of why the Jewish law comes to its certain decisions, and why in certain situations it's not flexible, in certain areas it is flexible. We're going to discuss all this. First of all, I want to start where it all began. Because to understand Jewish law, primarily, it's not a group of people that sat around the table and looked at society and determined law. That's not the origination of Jewish law. Jewish law begins going back 3,322 years ago at the receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. It all began when Moses came down, descended the mountain with the 2 tablets. We call them in Hebrew the Luchot Habrit, and he shared and taught and educated the community what these lessons and what's taught within the framework of Torah. Now, you might say, what are you talking about? I deal with modern issues in modern times. You're telling me the Torah spoke about how do I use a microwave? Microwaves were not created in the time of the Torah. You're going to tell me it's going to, can I use an elevator on the Sabbath if I don't push the buttons? I mean, hundreds and hundreds of questions that deal with modern day issues. How do you relate to that? And how do you say that if it's all founded in the teachings of Torah, and it's all in the Bible, verse after verse, you'll find every single answer. But wait a second. Life changes. Things have changed. Culture changes. Societies change. Talk about a person from Egypt, and then living in the desert, and then coming through traveling of over 2,000 years. Don't you think things are going to change? Culture, music, hobbies, interests, you name it, everything else is changing, right? Every time I'm amazed when I talk to people that have a fascination for cars, and there are quite a big number out there. People love cars, people love sports cars, people love designs on cars. They get caught up and they say, wow, the new Audi is really cool. This model, whatever it is, the new Porsche just has the aerodynamic design to it is just splendid. And everyone has their car that they like. It could be because it's gas efficiency, because it's compact, because it's big and it's big wheels, and you can schlep every piece of garbage from your entire neighborhood in the back of your own truck. Everyone has their type of car that they like. But what's fascinating is that in the last 20 years, which 20 years is not such a long period of time, you all can go back in your memory, and you could remember seeing a car strolling down the streets in your neighborhood or on the highway, or seeing it in a magazine, or a car that your parents bought. And you look at it and you say, wow, I can't wait to get into that vehicle that just has all the latest gimmicks and gears and everything. And then you see, literally 20 years later, that same car that you were drooling over, in the sense of you were so proud that if someone you knew owned that vehicle, all of a sudden that same car, now we call it in Hebrew, it's a shanda, which means it's a disgrace. You're sort of hiding it. People are saying, I'm buying this for my kid for her 16th birthday, because I know she can, or he can, dent it. I don't really mind. Or this is an extra car, a fourth car, a seventh car. It's very interesting to see how the marketing angle of society, how because things transfer from day to day, and we're constantly put in front of the decision board, and we're asked to make a decision. Choose. What do you think is cool? What do you think is in? And you have this with cars, you have this with cell phones, you have this literally with every single creation that's a little gadget, and you get excited about. In a very short period of time, that same gadget that you bought it You bought it at the peak of the price. You didn't want to even wait for any sale, because if you wait for a sale, you probably won't get it right away, and you might have to wait another month. And you were willing to pay who knows how much for that product. That same product all of a sudden looks old, it looks stale, it's almost embarrassing, and you say, oh, I can't wait to get rid of this thing. What is the reason? The reason is, the logical reason, without getting too deep and analytical, the logical reason is because the way we were designed as human beings, the way we were created, is that we constantly yearn to the next new thing. That's it. We like what's in today. We like to be part of a moving society. We like to fit in. We like to be cutting edge, partially because that's the education today. And you see it today, in today's generation, way more than ever. And it's interesting as you see it in different communities, in different cities, in different countries. You see it also at the contrast. You'll see some places. I was just in New York a couple of days ago, and the buzz and excitement of certain things over here wouldn't fly. And there's certain things in Seattle, the greater Seattle community, that we get excited over, and a lot of people on other parts of the states living in the same USA would say, yeah, I don't care for that. It's a society thing. It's what we read and what our friends push us to believe. And it's sort of this rat race of people trying to elbow the other person and say, I have the newest thing. I'm first in line. I have made it to the top. And it's sad, I got to tell you. Simply, it's sad because, unfortunately, you see people destroy certain things in their life because they need the next thing, and they're willing to literally compromise at a high risk, sometimes their family, their salaries, their positions. Who knows what people do for just fitting in, to be that cool person that fits in, the person of society, a cultured human being, someone that's totally with it today. And then every once in a while, you're blessed to stumble across a person that really doesn't care. They really don't care. It doesn't bother them one bit. They're proud of living to some degree, we like to call it in the past. And they say, it's not broken, I'm happy. I was always blessed to appreciate everything I have. All the words that we really want to hear within ourselves. Once in a while, we stumble across that human being that actually enlightens our life and says, hey, simple, original, old, all these things, if it works, it makes my life beautiful, and I appreciate greater things about life. This is a nutshell of how life works. Why am I giving you this whole introduction and this whole sort of pep talk on culture and pop culture and the existence of articles that we acquire throughout our life? Why is that important? Because going back to the discussion of Jewish law is ancient law. Ancient law means nothing changed. The same lesson, the same message that Moses taught his children and taught his grandchildren and taught the entire community at that period of time is the same exact lessons that have to apply to us today. The same exact lessons have to be not just apply, but they have to be real, and they have to be intertwined within our daily life. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples how this works. But I want you to understand this foundational perspective, that if you don't understand this idea, it's extremely challenging and difficult to understand Jewish law. Because things do change. Again, society, science, technology, things have constantly been advancing, and as I'm speaking, things are advancing. And what's remarkable is Jewish law moves at exactly the same pace. It doesn't contradict at all. And I know you're going to say, Rabbi, get with it, man. You don't know what you're talking about. Things are not the same. When Moses came down Mount Sinai, there was no stretch limo waiting over there for him. There was barely a horse and a buggy. You're telling me things don't change? There was no cell phone. He could have emailed the whole thing. Today you can walk around. I was in an elevator the other day, and there was two guys coming down from some company. They worked at some technology company, and one guy turns to the other one and says, come to think of it, my first computer was I can't remember what he said. I think he said 20 megahertz. And the guy says, "Oh, you're ancient. My first computer was, a half a gig." Today, you have that on your cell phone. You have that in a small little chip. And in 20 years from now, your kids are going to laugh at you and they say, "Gosh, you lived at a period of time when this was so-and-so." Today, we have it all on our wristwatch. I mean, just that's what's happening. Technology is moving, advancing. Things are quick, fast download. We all want it now, and we need it now. And if you don't get it fast enough, I know myself. I got the BlackBerry, syndrome. And if I don't get my email fast enough, I'm ready. Like, what's going on over here? Wait a second. Take your time. It's a big message coming across. It's a lot of bandwidth that has to be used. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you had to go to an office. You couldn't do it on the road. I mean, the advancement that we're living through in today's society and the way technology is moving is at such a great, rapid pace that literally, it's overwhelming to the human being. So when we talk about Jewish law, one important fact you have to understand: Jewish law is not emotional. Jewish law has zero emotion when it comes to compromising, when it comes to establishing law. We're talking about Jewish law versus secular law. What's Jewish law all about? Why was it created? Why do we have it? How do we determine Jewish law? How do we advance Jewish law to modern technology and modern advancement in science? How do we deal with all these issues? Hopefully we'll cover most of them right here today on Shmooze Radio. So before the break, I sort of prompt a question. And the question was, well, it was more like a statement, actually. And that was that Jewish law is non-emotional. It doesn't get emotion, has no emotion involved in determining law. It's factual. Now, is that a true statement? Or am I being harsh on Jewish law? Because in reality, let's talk about a second secular law. Secular law is all emotion. It's all based on our ethical behavior and the morals that we want to establish, society that we want to create, and therefore from country to country, people to people, generation to generation, things change. We constantly go back to the ethics committee and we say this makes sense, or this is a law that we should establish. It could be a law in relationship to death penalty versus life in prison versus capital punishment versus all these different things. It could be, law pertaining to how you get along with your neighbor. What should happen to your garbage? What are you allowed to put in your garbage? I mean, law constantly changes by city, by state, by district. And primarily, the reason is because it's created by man. And man is constantly looking to change things in the sense of create a framework that works for that period of time in society. So therefore, you look and you say the same committee that gathered 20 years ago or even 10 years ago to determine certain law, we look back and we say, okay, it worked for then. Or we look back and we say, maybe it didn't work as well as they originally planned. Therefore, let's gather today together and let's come out with a new law, a new stature, a new perspective that hopefully we can influence a new society to follow this way, and let's govern the community through this perspective, approach. Now, the question is, does this work? Does this not work? That's not what I'm talking about today. But that's the fact. The fact is that law is constantly changing. laws determined by human beings, laws determined by the perspective of how we analyze it. And therefore, to say that emotion doesn't play a tremendous role, you got to be naive, because every single thing that we do, if you think about any law, has in a major way an emotional factor played into the card. And it makes sense because people are making the law. And if law is determined by human beings, then if you pulled out the emotion, who knows what would happen? We would not be able to determine law. Now, Jewish law, on the other hand, is not created by human beings. You might say, Rabbi, what are you talking about? I know I go to a rabbi and I ask my rabbi a question, and my rabbi gives me a question, gives me an answer, gives me a perspective, gives me an insight that perhaps if I follow this, I will have more blah, 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 success, happiness, joy. I'll be a better businessman. People, according to Jewish law, we don't go to just secular courts first. We try to work it out in the Jewish community, even in today's day and age, without the temple and without the sanctity of the land of Israel the way it used to be going back 2,000 years ago. Nevertheless, till today, talking about 2010, soon to be 2011, in today's society, the traditional approach to a dispute between two human beings is not to show up in the courtroom, in the secular courtroom, but it's to stand before a rabbinical courtroom of rabbis that determine and will hopefully give the proper, insight of what the outcome should be. Many times the situation is greater than that, or it involves different parties that don't want to go to a Jewish court system. Then obviously it ends up in secular court, and hence you read about different stories that even though they are involved traditional Jewish people, you will find that many times these stories do make it to secular court. And in fact, one of the most brilliant statements I one time heard from a judge in New York City, he said, I don't understand you guys. Why can't you guys figure this out in your own court system? What are you making me crazy? What are you making my life difficult? You guys have your own body of law, and hopefully you'll be able to determine this on your own. But that's very rare that you'll actually hear a judge step forward and say that. But what I want to talk about is, why is Jewish law that's so ancient, why is it something that in modern times we can still govern by it, and we can turn to it, and we can say this law makes sense? This law will relate to a modern day matter that happens in today's society. Now, I want to derail for a second from this discussion, just so you understand a little bit what I'm talking about on a practical level. When you talk about medicine and morals, for the concept of understanding how certain things are determined and how Jewish law comes to be, from an ethical perspective, when someone is going through a trauma, could be kidney donation, it could be blood transfusion, it could be bone marrow donation, or any different type of medical challenge that a person's going through, and they're asked the question, how far can they push the limits? Under what circumstances are they allowed to do it? For instance, if a person donated one kidney, and this is their beloved child, and all of a sudden they want to donate their other kidney. Now, you might say, wait a second, a person only has two kidneys. Well, in reality, a person can live on dialysis for good over north of 20 years without any kidney. So a person's going to say, I love my child so much, I want to go ahead and grant my child a second chance at life. The first kidney failed, let me go do it again, and let me give my last kidney. Is that permissible in secular law? Is that permissible in Jewish law? Now, this is obviously a real case that occurs pretty often in the medical world, being that there's over 100,000 different types of donations, organ donations that are needed, and there's about only 25% of them actually filled. So there's a tremendous gap in the reality of what's needed versus what they have. So whenever there's a chance of finding that match, and when there is a match, the celebration and the blessings and the joy that takes place is at an all-time high. People, unfortunately, are constantly waiting. You hear people on waiting lists. You hear tragic stories of people that are looking to pay top dollar from just to get their hands on that organ that they need. And this is a big, big question in today's medical field. Now, when this question was brought before the ethics committee, they sort of thought back and forth, and they said, wait a second, we're putting that individual's life in danger. Now, yes, they happen to be the parent of that child. And yes, this father, for instance, wants to give his second kidney. It sounds like a wonderful idea from his part. But as a hospital that's governed by law and society, in modern day society, are we permitted can we allow our doctors to operate and to make that transfer of kidney from the donor, second kidney, to the patient that literally needs this perfect match? Now, from a Jewish perspective, I got to tell you, just so your breath doesn't jump out, the answer would be the same. The answer would be the same, that one is prohibited to actually give their second kidney, because if it means that they're going to live 20 years or whatever, how many years, on dialysis, but not with a healthy functioning kidney, Jewish law prohibits one to put themselves in danger. Now, the reason behind this case that I just brought up here, there is a fundamental reason why secular law comes to that answer, and there's a fundamental reason why Jewish law comes to that revelation as well. From a secular perspective, the ethics committee say, wait a second, we can't let the person's life be put in danger, and we have a responsibility to that human being that he has to stay, healthy to the best of his ability as long as he can. We as doctors can't go ahead and make that person live shorter because it might help another human being. We just can't do that. From a Jewish perspective, it goes way beyond what the doctors think and what the doctors feel. In fact, it has absolutely nothing to do with the feeling and the emotion of the doctors or the ethics committee or the family members. All those people play absolutely no role in determining Jewish law. What makes the difference over here is, you would say, how do we value life? Who gives life? And the answer is that life is given from God, and only God can take life. So if life is given from God, then we have absolutely no right in any way to put ourselves in danger to remove that gift or to diminish that gift in any way through the sense of this donation. But if I back up for a second, and we're talking about the first kidney, you might say, wait a second, based on that logic that you just explained to me, Rabbi, that we have absolutely no right to give from our existence, from our body, because it will put myself in danger. It will put the individual's life in danger. What about the first kidney? So this is where Jewish law perhaps differs from secular law. From a Jewish law perspective, dealing with organ transplantation, organ donation, could be heart beating, unheart beating, live donation. There's all different discussions in relationship to donations of organs. But talking about, for instance, a kidney donation, if a person were to give their first kidney, according to Jewish law, in today's society, that the advancement of medicine is so great that the chances of a kidney donation failing, in other words, hurting the person that is the donor, affecting the donor itself, is extremely low. I believe the number out there is 0.03%. So we're talking about it's a very slim chance of a organ donation, in the sense of a kidney donation, being actually dangerous, and that's the key word over here, being dangerous for the donor. So in such a situation, Jewish law would encourage the individual to be a donor. Until today, we see there are many banks set up in Jewish communities throughout the world that constantly, and organizations that have been established to help people identify and put themselves down as determining what type of, if they're a compatible donation to X, Y, and Z or not. And it might come to bone marrow or other donations as well. This is a tremendous mitzvah, we call it, which means a good deed. And it's an act of kindness. And not only that, it's a tremendous act of kindness because through your gift of life and your healthy gift of life, meaning it won't affect your day in and day out, celebration of life, you allow another person to live, and that's a wonderful deed. Just think about the outcome of, through your actions, through your deeds, that clearly you're putting your body in an uncomfort zone for a while, but it's not a danger zone. You are giving the gift of life to another person. From a secular perspective, a lot of the things when it comes to donation of organs is determined by what the patient wants, and is the patient willing to live? And, we usually listen to the voice of the patient. And so when it comes to receiving a donation, if the patient says, I just don't want to be involved, I'm happy with my life right now, most ethics committees won't encourage that person. They might encourage, but won't twist their arm, so to speak, to say that you must have this operation. According to Jewish law, on the other hand, if the chances of survival is greater than 50%, and the chances of a healthy life is greater than 50%, then there's the aspect of coercion and convincing and encouraging the patient, because ultimately the patient makes the decision for a different reason. Because from Jewish law and from secular law, if you speak to any doctor that deals with these types of surgeries, they'll tell you that the patient has to be in the proper mindset. The patient has to be ready and willing to allow the medical professional to operate. And you can't force a person into an operation, because many times it has a practical negative reaction on the health of the human being. So the key word over here is that in Judaism we're concerned with danger versus non-danger. In Judaism we're concerned with who gives life versus who takes life. And in secular we're concerned with what makes the person feel good. Judaism is not concerned with that in most cases. Now, the reason why I'm saying everything most cases, because here I'm discussing this very, very deep, highly challenged subject, even in Jewish law. And I don't want you should think in any way I'm making light of these issues, because there are books and rabbis that spend their entire life throughout the last 2,000 years that literally have challenged these questions of what's considered brain dead, when it's considered the end of life, how do you determine what's considered dangerous versus not. Again, I'm not going into all the details, because this is not a detailed lecture. This is an information discussion today on Shmooze Radio. So I'm hoping that people understand a little bit when we talk about the difference between Jewish law and secular law. Jewish law is not emotional. So when a rabbi determines the law, it's not a rabbi saying, I feel this way, or I feel your pain, or, you know something, I really want to see you in synagogue. So it doesn't matter that according to traditional Judaism, one is prohibited to use a car on the holy day of Sabbath. I'm going to say, I want to see you in synagogue. You're an older individual, an older couple. You love to go to synagogue. Let my emotion kick in over here, and let's take the emotional approach. The emotional approach is, sure, come to synagogue, drive in your car, and I'll give you the chair right in the front row with no problem. And you know something? It doesn't matter that you live in a building that has on the 11th floor and there's an elevator coming down. Just take the elevator, get into your car, and come. Again, I'm making light of these type of scenarios, but these are questions that people deal with every day. Jewish law is not emotional. What makes Jewish law so powerful, and what makes Jewish law stand apart, and why it's so clear, crystal clear, in most cases, even in today's day and age, talking about more than 2,000 years and over 3,000 years since, more than 2,000 years since the destruction of the temple, and over 3,000 years since law was given at Mount Sinai. What makes this so unique is because in Jewish law, the way we determine law, we look at the reality of what we're trying to accomplish. And the reality is that if there's a verse that describes the sanctity of Shabbat, then the rabbis that sort of create a discussion or argue about that matter, it has to be constantly determining, are we still creating the sanctity of Shabbat? Is the seventh day of the week going to be holy? And if the seventh day of the week is going to be holy, what, under which circumstances can we allow to be done? In what scenario? Under why? When? To save a person's life, for instance, the law of Sabbath gets thrown out the window. We have absolutely no obligation to observe the Sabbath. If you see a person drowning, you don't say, hey, you know, it's my Sabbath today. I'm not going to go on my motorboat and save the person. No, you jump out there on Saturday, even though motorboat riding, according to traditional Judaism, is a big no-no. It doesn't matter. You're going to save a person. Because, again, the value of saving a person's life is greater than the value of observing this commandment. And the logic is, if we save this person's life today, the person in the future can observe many more happy and joyous 7-day-of-the-week holidays, Shabbat, in the future. So every single thing in Jewish law, every perspective that we have in Jewish law has to be determined not by emotion, but by a logical perspective of why we created that law. And this means in relationship to monetary issues. It has to deal with people borrowing money, lending money, contracts, no contracts, when are you responsible to pay, finding objects. This has to deal with, of course, with capital punishment and determining under what circumstances, why you're responsible, when you're responsible. This has to do with finding witnesses, testimony, who do we believe, who we don't believe. This has to do with the concept of juries. Does Judaism believe in creating a jury duty, or is it all about having a panel of highly influenced and intellectual judges that are well versed in this matter? So this is a major, major conflict and difference between Jewish law versus secular law. And the primary outline, again, is a simple difference. The primary difference is that Jewish law, because it was given over 3,000 years ago at Mount Sinai, and because Moses taught it from generation to generation, so this body of law, the essence of the body of law, has not changed. What changed is the situation, the scenarios. For instance, as I mentioned on the top of the hour, a microwave. We know, let's say if somebody keeps kosher, people go all the time to friends' homes, or you go to a motel and you want to, you want to heat something up, you're going there with your family for a day, or you're renting an apartment and there's an oven there and there's a microwave. So let's focus on the microwave for a second. Can a microwave become kosher? We know one of the things in Judaism, for those that are not familiar, that it's not enough going to a restaurant and saying, am I ordering a kosher fish that has the 2 kosher symbols, that has fins and scales? If it has those fins and scales, it's a kosher fish. That's why most seafood is not kosher, because seafood does not have fins and scales. But if you're talking about, let's say, for instance, a classical fish known as a salmon, salmon has fins and has scales, which would make it a kosher animal. So a person will walk into their local restaurant in Seattle and say, I like to keep kosher, or this week I'm going to try to keep kosher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to order only kosher fish. What makes kosher fish? As I just explained, it's very simple. It doesn't even have to be slaughtered. All it has to be is a fish that has both symbols known as fins and it has scales. If it has those 2 symbols, it's 1,000% a kosher fish, even kosher enough for me. Absolutely no problem. So you go and you order your salmon steak, and it comes out, it's delicious, and it's wonderful. Now, is that considered kosher or not? So if someone asked me that question, and someone's not on the level of going to a kosher restaurant, I would say it's a great beginning, because at least you're getting the fish that is a kosher fish. But if you're asking if that fish is really 100% kosher, according to the essence of the law, it's not just about the fish, but it's the preparation. It's the ingredients that goes into enhancing that fish. It's the pot or the pan or whatever it is made that fish was made in. It's the oven that it goes into. So you see, it's not just about the article of food itself. It's about all the laws that pertain, and that's what makes kosher complicated, and that's what makes kosher to some degree even more expensive, because there's so much more detail involved besides the ingredient of the food itself. It's really about the prep and all the things that surround the law itself. Now, where does this all come from? Again, these are all determined from biblical verses explaining the uniqueness of how one should be observant in relationship to Jewish law. So when we talk about this concept of Jewish law versus secular law, we don't have that much time to really get into much more detail, but I really like this topic. So I probably will bring it back right here on Shmooze Radio again in the future. But what I want people to walk away with is one simple lesson. And the simple lesson is as follows: that determining Jewish law versus secular law that's not going to make you a better human being. But what does make you a better human being is when a person as a Jew looks back into their Judaism and says, wow, Judaism is not ancient. Judaism is not distant. It's not old. It's not old-fashioned. But it's really something that even in modern times, I can take a microwave and there are laws how I can make that microwave kosher, that on my next trip I could be eating 100% kosher out of it. These are things that really get me excited about sharing the uniqueness of Jewish law. And yet Jewish law is something that goes back for 3,322 years, and it has not changed in its existence, in its validity, and its power behind the law. You're listening to Shmooze Radio. We'll be back right after. We'll be back actually next week, same time, same place.